Good morning and welcome to the first part of our new webinar series, eWorldwide. In this series, we give a voice to the international visitors and exhibitors of eWorld to present their national energy market. And today we will start with the United Kingdom. For this presentation and discussion, I would warmly like to welcome our today's guests from the UK Department for Business and Trade and Scottish Development International. Simon Tosserams, he is Senior Business Development Manager for Germany and Netherlands in the field of clean growth at Northern Powerhouse, as well as Christian Marienberg. He is Clean Growth Campaign Manager Europe in the field of trade at British Consulate General, as well as Meinholf Otto. He is Global Business Development Specialist at Scottish Development International. I hope I explained everything right. Good morning. In a moment, we will start with the presentation, which will take around about 1 hour. And afterwards, you will have, as usual, the opportunity to ask your questions. You can do this either via the chats in Zoom or via the chats in eWorld community. I will have an eye on it, and then we can answer all the questions in the end. So that's all from my part at the moment. I will hand over to our speakers. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yep, many thanks, Isabel, and also many thanks to eWorld for inviting us along. Thanks for the kind introduction and welcome all, and thank you all for joining us today as we will share some insights on the UK's energy market and also shed some more light about the investment opportunities linked to this. So as said, it'll be three of us with you today. So we've got Meinholf from the Scottish Government and Simon and myself representing the whole of the UK. We, in our capacity, working for the British Government, are here to help businesses like yourself to invest and do business in the UK. We can also help you source products from the UK, support on any market access issues that business from the UK are facing. And we also advocate for free and fair global trade. And I think while this is pretty generic, I think some of this also comes through during the course of the presentation as we focus on the energy aspects. The presentation today is roughly structured into 3 parts. So I will kick us off sharing a few words about the UK story so far in our leadership in the joint effort to combat climate change, and also tell us a bit more about the energy mix in the UK. We will then, in the second part, which I think is the main part for today, focus a bit more on the way to net zero and what major opportunities are on the horizon and actually happening now in the UK as we speak. So we'll be focusing on offshore wind and hydrogen, although there are many more as the presentation will also go to show. And then we'll just finish off with a couple of final remarks to then head into the discussion. So where the journey begins, let's start here. So with a globally leading commitment to carbon net zero, the UK was one of the first countries to recognize and act on the economic and also security threats of climate change. So in 2008, just to give you a bit of history background, essentially, the UK committed to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. And with the Climate Change Act, this has also been legislated and enshrined in law, which made us the first major economy in the world to do so. Since then, the UK's ambition to decarbonise have grown. And in 2019, the UK became the first major economy to pass a law that also committed to end global warming by 2050. And aiming to reach net zero by 2050 is at the heart of various UK strategies and policies. We go a bit into this later on today. And I think it's always worth recognizing that, yes, there is a lot of commitment, which is great, but it's actually also then the businesses driving the agenda and the change. And the UK has got quite some interesting vehicles in making this, those business models thrive, which we will also discuss as we go on. And a lot of the challenge is obviously about transitioning to an electricity system that is 100% zero carbon, as this will enable us to also then decarbonize other sectors as we go along. So over the last decade, the carbon intensity of electricity generation in Britain and also across Europe and most parts, luckily, in the world has fallen. In the UK, this has been at a higher velocity, so at a higher speed, though, than in any other major economy. The increase in renewable generation is largely driven by more renewables coming to the grid, and also in combination with the phase out of coal, which have both been politically supported. The uptake of more renewable energy has largely been supported by the Contract for Difference scheme that provides certainties to investors when developing renewable projects. And the coal phase out has been achieved through long-term price clarity, also through the induction of the carbon price. So I won't go into any more detail in the interest of time, but if there are any questions, we can come to those towards the end. The International Energy Agency World Outlook shows that the global energy crisis can be a historic turning point towards a cleaner and more secure future, and the UK is at the forefront of this. It's also worth flagging that the electricity grid across Europe is obviously getting more and more interconnected, and it was quite interesting when I was preparing for today. I also learned that in last year, basically, electricity exports from the UK reached a record high as the UK actually supported European efforts to move away from Russian fossil fuel supplies. And according to a recent study by the Imperial College London and Drugs, the UK exported 8% of its electricity generated within the UK, which is roughly 5.5 terawatt hours, to Europe, and thereby also playing supporting our European partners essentially in mitigating any risk and ensuring energy security. And I think this is really relevant because there's now a shift, as you know, from going net zero, but also focusing on the energy security aspect, and of course the affordability. So your good old energy triangle with kind of different emphasis depending on where we are in the world. So in summary, the energy transition is well underway in the UK. We're heading towards above 50% renewables already today, as this graph from the National Grid ESO goes to show. And the UK has approximately 50% of all European offshore wind installed capacity, as well as the largest offshore wind market in Europe, and the second largest in the world. I think we're just overtaken by China about a year ago or so. And the UK is expected to retain this place until at least 2030. And together with our European partners, we recognize the important role that renewable energy can play, and are really keen to accelerate the green transition across the continent, and believe that we can really bring quite a lot of interesting technologies and businesses to the table. And I'm really keen to work with you as well to make the energy transition happening. There are also kind of partnerships where the UK is now getting more involved in, which will also help accelerate the wider rollout of offshore wind, in particular through the North Seas Energy Corporation, for example, where the UK is now part again since December last year, where we're working towards facilitating the planning and development of offshore wind renewable projects, also from a grid perspective. And before I come to the second part of the presentation, I just want to say, so we do not rest on our laurels. I mean, we are ahead of the game, yes. Are the largest offshore wind market in Europe with roughly 13.8 gigawatt installed capacity, but we are rather building on our existing skills and expertise in the field, are really keen to work with businesses like yourself, like with our like-minded partners, to deliver net zero, increase energy security at an affordable price together. I already mentioned a couple of strategies that underpin the government's ambition, and that also then translate into how policies are being shaped to be business friendly. So the net zero strategy is very much at the heart of the UK's general approach to things. This has then also been backed by the British energy security strategy in the wake of the Russian invasion to Ukraine, and more recently also by the UK's critical mineral strategy, which has been launched in July 22. And I just want to mention this critical mineral strategy as well, because obviously there is a lot of need, and critical minerals will become ever more important as we seek to bolster our energy security and also domestic industrial resilience across the continent. So when we talk about supply chains, this topic is becoming ever more important. The technologies we are talking about will lead to a massive increase of the need for critical minerals. So I think in 2040, the world is expected to need 4 times as many critical minerals for clean technologies as it does today. And I think it's good for us together to look into these aspects and make sure that we do have the right sources to deliver the projects that we need. And the critical mineral strategy from the UK sets out our plan to secure our supply chains, to boost domestic capabilities, and also to attract investment, to play a leading role in solving the global challenges together with our international partners in this important field. On the right-hand side, the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, which is a policy piece that's been, I think, announced almost 2 years ago now, just kind of lists here for you a bit like what the priorities areas are. And today we'll focus on point 1 and 2 in particular, so around offshore wind and hydrogen. But I just wanted to say that this is not a kind of exhaustive list. I mean, there are many, many other opportunities. Some of it cuts across hydrogen, as we will see. There is also a lot of capability around circular economy. The whole topic around this is also shaping up. But I thought I'd just put this up here for the 10 as the 10-point plan is the major policy piece. So today's focus is on offshore wind and hydrogen, as we've mentioned. So looking at offshore wind, again here on this slide, a couple of figures for you, and we'll go into some more detail, including around the innovation and funding support and floating offshore wind right in the middle circle in red here in a moment. But I mean, just to kick us off with a bit of the larger figures here. So building on our success in offshore wind, the UK is increasing the 2030 target for offshore wind from 40 gigawatt to 50 gigawatt, with 5 gigawatt to come from floating offshore wind, which is obviously getting more important as we go into deeper seabed levels, which then make the business case for fixed bottom offshore less viable. When we look at where we are today in terms of new wind installations, you can see on this slide that the UK is putting a lot of offshore wind into the water, or at least has done so in 2021, which is a figure I took here. However, as said, I mean, this is now like 2 gigawatts of offshore wind, and we actually probably need to double this to get more offshore wind capacity to be on track with our ambitions. And the way that the UK is addressing this is what I will go into now. So it's basically 3 things. It's a solid government support regime in the form of contract for difference, which I mentioned before. We'll then talk a bit about innovation, ecosystem and funding, and also the collaboration between stakeholders. So government support mechanism, just to point out here the importance of the contract for difference, which has been, I think, instrumental to drive down costs and efficiency in the offshore wind sector in particular. And I think this holds true for the UK, but as the UK is such a big market, I think it's also majorly helped to reduce costs and build supply chains across Europe in this technology. And the way it does so is that it provides that it de-risks investments at the end of the day by providing a revenue certainty for developers and investors in offshore wind farms. And you can see here on the right-hand side how the price has gone down. And we definitely want to see more floating projects in allocation round 5, and also looking at ways how this contract for difference scheme can best supply those nascent technologies. I just quickly mention it because I know it's important and the industry is discussing this. When we come to think about non-price factors, so obviously the price has gone down, which is great, but we are also conscious that this might put some strain onto some of the developers in actually materializing the project, as the price pressure is so high, with a bit of a question mark about what this means for the wider supply chain and their profitability. We are not there yet to say anything firm, but as far as I'm aware, the British government, like many other governments, are also thinking about including non-price factors into the CFD auction going forward. So in addition to the government support, there is some important actors and main areas of research and innovation with associated funding that I'd like to point out. So the one thing is the Net Zero Innovation Portfolio, and in particular the Floating Offshore Wind Demonstration Program, which is supported by government funding by up to or a bit above 31 million in grant funding. And this is for demonstration and innovative floating offshore wind technologies. There are a couple of challenges that will be addressed in particular. So it's about dynamic cables, it's about anchoring and moorings, floaters and foundations, and also industry-defined innovation. So there's a bit of an open element there as well. And then the first point is around integrated demonstration of multiple technologies. The other body or entity I'd like to mention here is the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, which is a leading innovation center for offshore wind. And it's basically, I think what makes it unique is that it is an open access facility with extensive R&D capabilities that is already looking at things like floating offshore wind, but also the circular economy aspect in the wind energy sector I mentioned before, which also brings me on to the, I think, third strength in the UK, which is about the collaboration between stakeholders. So underpinned by this government support mechanism, the innovation landscape, and the thriving commercial and public sector, a lot of this is actually brought together, I think, quite effectively through a couple of business and industry and government bodies. So the UK offshore wind sector deal is an industry and government partnership that enables the growth across the industry. And I think this is really important to form the right collaborations to really get an understanding of what the issues are that actually hinders further growth in the industry. We've also got the Offshore Wind Acceleration Task Force, which is co-chaired by one of our ministers and an industry champion, which brings together the industry experts, but also the regulators to tackle unnecessary delay and inefficiency. So we're talking about planning bottlenecks here in particular, and also how to increase grid connectivity, for example. The Floating Offshore Wind Task Force is also working together to enable growth in this emerging technology. And also through colleagues like ourselves, so like Meinolf and Simon and I, we're also facilitating industry engagement with policy stakeholders to share insights, what's on industry mind essentially, and share these readouts across our departments to then make policy suggestions on the back of it. So this brings me on to floating offshore wind, the next big thing which I mentioned a couple of times. And before I hand over to Meinolf from the Scottish government, I just wanted to say that this is a very emerging technology. As you can see on this side, there are opportunities in Scotland, but also some coming up on the Celtic Sea. And with that, I hand over to Meinolf to shed some more flavor on the developments in this exciting field, particularly through the lens of Scotland. Over to you, Meinolf. And please do tell me when I shall switch the slides.
Thank you, Christian. Yeah, it's exciting to see what happened in this space. I still remember when the first project, the Hywind project, started, and the Kincardine project came on, and it was all new. And the success of these projects, I think, is what drives the developments now. And it is simply important that at some point the technology becomes bankable and is seen as a true solution and as a true technology to do these projects. I just mentioned yesterday to you, Christian, that in the news was one of the projects from from Shell and Scottish Power Renewables, where they're talking about up to 225 floating foundations that they will that they're looking at for their projects. I've seen some other numbers that always are for me astonishing when we first only were looking at these. From today's perspective, rather small project with 30 megawatt or 48 megawatt. But these first ones were important and obviously helped to bring us to the point where we are now. Many of you might be familiar with the ScotWind round, which is the latest leasing round in Scotland, and the total volume is about 25 gigawatt, and 15 gigawatt are aiming at a floating solution, which is really incredible. It also means a tremendous growth around all of this. For many companies, this has been a driver to engage, because many things are needed that are not there yet. And I can maybe say at this point also the total growth is significant in Scotland, because we have right now about only 2 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity installed, and our total pipeline is going towards 38 gigawatts. So especially that portion of the floating wind in that is a significant driver for developments and investments that is happening right now. And we really try to also be very engaged with the companies that are doing it. We follow each one's ambitions there and try to see that also this complex growth process is optimized, and it's definitely an incredible moment in time to see these developments occurring, and also the companies involved are excited about this new technology that helps us open basically a totally new market, where before, without floating, we had difficulties to deploy the turbines. Maybe I stop here. I'm not sure, Christian, are there other elements that you want me to tackle at this point?
No, I think this is fine. I mean, we've got a couple of slides here which will be made available to you as part of the eWorld community package later on anyway. So we've got a couple of supply chain projections, but I think this is probably, too detailed for now to go through. So I think the other thing worth mentioning, I guess, is the whole infrastructure element. I'm not sure, Meinhof, if you want to say a few words on this aspect as well.
Yeah, I just had the chance to take a tour of all of the ports and what is developing there. Obviously, one of the floating technologies is using concrete. I know that the units are 100 yards by 100 yards by 20 yards tall. So you can imagine, if you are producing 100 units for a project, the sizable infrastructure that you need. And it's also, again, very exciting to see how these things are being developed, and how we are trying to make sure that interested parties are finding the right infrastructure for exactly doing that, developing these technologies for these projects.
Yeah, great. Things that maybe just to add also from a kind of investment perspective. So if you are operating in this field, there is a so-called high potential investment opportunity that is to establish port-side manufacturing facilities in the Cromarty and Moray Firth to meet the growing demand for floating substructures, mooring systems, dynamic cables and substations. And I mean, happy to share some more details on this individually, if you like. Yeah, many thanks. I would Manoj, I think this brings us then to the close of the kind of offshore wind piece. I think we are running quite well ahead of time, so I think we've got some time for Q&A later on to go into some more details. I think just before I hand over to Simon to dive into hydrogen a bit, let me conclude by saying there are many ways to be excited and optimistic about investing in the UK and the offshore wind market. I hope this came through and I hope this resonated with you. And we definitely look forward to future exchange with you on this. And with that, Simon, I hand over to you.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks, Meinhof. We decided to focus on hydrogen as kind of our second theme, as it ties in really quite nicely with the UK's strength in offshore wind and the potential that lies behind the offshore wind capacity powering electrolyzers and producing green, or as we say in the UK, electrolytic hydrogen. So we thought also in the context of the geopolitical shifts that we're experiencing, hydrogen is one area that we wanted to present on today. And indeed, when we are at the eWorld in May. So that's why we chose hydrogen, just by way of background. And some of the frameworks that support the hydrogen economy build up in the UK have already been mentioned by Christian. Early on, we have, since April 2020, the British Energy Security Strategy, which really aims to cement the UK's position in hydrogen globally. The hydrogen production target was increased to up to 10 gigawatt by 2030, of which at least 5 gigawatt are to be produced through renewable energy. Again, the offshore wind link is quite obvious here. But also the UK has gone down the path where it's to some degree technology neutral and supports all kinds of colors, for instance, through CCUS, blue hydrogen. So I think it's relatively kind of open-minded when it comes to the technology to drive to the goal of reducing greenhouse emissions. So I should say probably that some of the numbers, they may have changed, but in 2022, we had a project pipeline of already 20 gigawatt, and of which 9 CCUS projects, and as well as 39 electrolytic projects were about to be built. So you can see it on this map. This may have increased in the meantime, but those were the numbers for last year. You will see on this map again the kind of the direct link between offshore wind and hydrogen clusters. So in the northwest as well as northeast of England, for instance, you have huge clusters emerging, but also in Scotland, of course, where you have significant offshore wind capacity and emerging hydrogen clusters around those. You will also see a link between industrial clusters or former industrial clusters and see that where those exist, for instance, around Manchester or also in Wales, there is an ambition to increase hydrogen production and build a hydrogen economy to power those industrial clusters. We do work with plenty of German companies, international companies, in the context of building up those structures and support these developments. And that's why we are very keen to be present at the eWorld, to find new partners, but also to talk about existing partnerships. Here you can see kind of that we focus on the entire value chain in our ambition. This is in the context, of course, of energy security, but you will be familiar with some of, or potentially be familiar with some of the kind of the household names of the UK hydrogen economy. For instance, ITM Power, who work closely with Linde and recently announced a significant delivery or project of electrolyzers to a German project linked to RWE near Lingen, if I'm not mistaken, in Lower Saxony. So those are some of the kind of the household names, but there's a vast complex of industry and companies beneath that, kind of powering the entire value chain, which is emerging and which we are very keen to develop in the UK, but also in partnership with industry from abroad. And we here's a bit of a sales pitch. Thanks, Christian. You can probably...
sorry, Sam, I'm just putting on slides as I think you were just about to mention the sales pitch. I don't mean to rush.
And I believe you get all these slides after the presentation, so you can read through those. I think in essence, what we probably the next slide will be even more of interest, because it kind of shows you the kind of 3 pillars on which we through which we are trying to ramp up production in the UK, hydrogen production that is, as well as develop kind of the business models around it. We have the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund, a 240 million grant funding scheme, which has already started. So the first rounds strands have been launched. This is to support really different elements of the emerging hydrogen value chain, from feed and post-feed studies to capital expenditure support, and also particularly CCUS projects that will be supported through this funding scheme, kind of to solve the chicken-egg problem, and very similar to what Christian mentioned on the CFD side, we are developing this hydrogen business model to support kind of the revenue side for the suppliers, to give them certainty and kind of bridge the cost gap that exists between conventional energy sources or carriers and hydrogen. So that's currently under development, and we are also working quite with some determination on a low carbon hydrogen standard, as well as a certification scheme, recognizing that will be incredibly important also in the context of international trade of hydrogen molecules. So that's very important, and kind of a bit of the backbone of all the efforts to develop these strands. So these kind of the 3 pillars, I would say, through which we try to support the ramp up of the hydrogen economy in the UK. I should say that, and I mentioned the kind of the role of partnership. I think it's probably more a generic slide, but just one more sentence about kind of the role of partnership. I think the UK recognizes that this significant challenge can only be tackled in partnership with our international partners. And I know our Scottish friends, they are very advanced in engaging with German lender, and I think as a UK, we are very keen to develop those partnerships. We've recently launched a regional initiative called the North Meets North Hydrogen Dialogue, for which we partnered up with 5 northern German lender, which came together under the High Five partnership, and we're trying to kind of progress partnerships along those lines with other partners, other regions, and I think when we will be in person at the eWorld in May, we will also have that as our main theme, the role of partnerships around hydrogen. So you're all very welcome, of course, to join that session. I think it's on the 23rd of May, but I'm sure that will be announced through the platform. I think in the following slides, you will just have some more general information about how you can reach us and how we support businesses such as yourself and investors more generally, be it in Scotland or in other parts of the UK. And
great.
Over to Christian.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. That's been very, very useful, very, very concise. And as you said, I mean, just think the 3 things for you to keep in mind. I mean, net zero is on, and the UK offers the right environment. There are plenty of opportunities to grow your business in the UK. So we mentioned offshore wind and hydrogen many times today, but as I said at the beginning, at the outset, there's also opportunities around accelerating the shift to zero emission vehicles, jet zero green ships, pretty high on the agenda, also from a kind of alternative fuels perspective, possibly linking to hydrogen, greener buildings, investing in carbon capture, usage and storage. UK is also an interesting partner there with some good project and expertise, and also the whole topic around green finance innovation. So we are here to help you navigate the landscape across the UK, and look forward to any future exchange with you. And for now, many thanks for your attention, and we look forward to try to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for this overview. Are there any questions from the public? I already see one in the chat, which refers to electric storage. So how is the UK's government looking on electric storage?
So maybe I'm happy to try and answer that in a very kind of evasive fashion, as I'm not an expert on storage in general, but of course, storage is seen by the government as an enabler of the energy transition, and that concerns all sorts of storage options, for hydrogen in terms of caverns, be it other, for instance, a liquid air storage facility near Manchester, I believe, and there are other routes to storage. On electric storage in particular, maybe we can come back to you with some more information on that. As I don't believe any of my other colleagues, maybe Christian or may know more about it. But we can definitely get back to you with that if you send us an email.
Yeah, sorry, Simon, you were a bit cut off, or got a bit cut off my end. That may have been my connection. I'm not sure about others, but I thought what you said that what I picked up, I think, was was pretty much hang on. Can I just check, mine or anyone else? Isabel, could you hear Simon's answer?
It was a bit interrupted. I don't know how it was for the public, but maybe if we both had the same problem, I think there was a little connection problem.
But happy to in essence, I was saying that the government is looking at all sorts of options for hydrogen, for storage, as it's seen as a key enabler for energy transition. But on electric storage, we can get back to you on more information, maybe offline, if you send us an email. More information, maybe.
Okay.
If I may, of course, with many of the developments, it is of course also interesting to include the storage, and I know of several projects. Actually, the high wind project was mentioned in the beginning. I know that there is a project that is using electrical storage from those developers in order to see how to combine electrical storage with offshore in order to supply a more even stream of electricity to the grid. But I think also in conjunction with electrolyzers for hydrogen production, it probably is significant to have these technologies. And that's, I probably would say again, is the exciting part. With all of these projects right now on the table and being developed, anybody that has good solutions in that area is probably more than welcome to deliver or to show that they can be a part of these projects.
Thank you. Are there further questions? I take a look to the chat in the community.
I mean, I see another question from Tobias on innovation support and regulatory or removal of regulatory blockers, but I'm not quite sure what technology this is referring to. I mean, I think we covered some of this during the course of the presentation, but also happy to take a separate discussion afterwards, Tobias, on those aspects.
I don't know if it refers to the topic of electric storage or if it's for another topic.
Maybe if I can just use the moment to share another project that is going on. It's the we call it the Flotter project, Flotter Terminal project in Orkney. Very interesting because in the meantime, I think 3 offshore consortia have joined to deliver the electricity for an electrolyzer project with 1.5 gigawatt. And then the plan would be to actually deliver that hydrogen that is produced there via a pipeline to St. Fergus, which is a location that is strategic because it is a point where several existing pipelines are coming together, and we're also assessing the usage of those pipelines maybe for hydrogen delivery. It's really very, very exciting to see how all of these things are coming together and are generating more interest, because obviously if somebody's moving in that direction, others are seeing an opportunity to join and increase the volume and make it also therefore more economically attractive to participate. And yeah, so it's one project I always am excited to share about, because it's with 1.5 gigawatt, I would say, an electrolyzer size that is notable also in the European context.
Yeah, it's really, really impressive. And Tobias, maybe also, I mean, just on the point of energy storage, I mean, like Simon says, yes, it is absolutely recognized. So, and there's also some funding innovation behind this. So the Industry Strategy Challenge Fund is investing in the research base. I think there are 23 separate challenges that are being funded. You may have seen that in the wake of COP26, which now almost seems like it's been in a previous life, but it's not that long ago actually that the UK hosted it in Scotland. Actually, there was the inauguration of Longer Duration Storage Project Group, which is a more global entity. So I think this is very well understood. I think particularly on the longer duration storage side, the electricity network regulation, I think with the 302 regime, is also quite welcoming of innovation, because it actually does pay distribution grid operators, of which we in the UK have far fewer numbers. So I think it's a bit easier to navigate maybe than the 400 we've got in Germany, if it's not 600. To make those storage projects a bit more viable also on the vehicle grid side. And the way that the UK is supporting network and battery technology and energy storage is also through the Faraday Battery Challenge. I can share more information with you afterwards on this, but it's also started off with creating a UK battery industrialization center. There are quite a few collaborative R&D projects going on, and I think the uptake with fast charging in the UK is also comparing relatively well to competitors. We actually see quite a few investments landing in that area, and I mean there are many touch points. I think the similar things, you know, this mixture of funding, the mixture combining it with some support mechanism, combining it with industry policy exchanges to connect the innovators in the field is addressed. So we've got the Advanced Propulsion Center, particularly as a global center of excellence for low carbon transport. I can share some more details with you offline if we could maybe exchange details.
Thank you. And maybe as a last question and to sum everything up, what can other countries learn from the UK?
Yeah, I think it's really this mixture of having an ambition but also a clear policy plan. I always find it a bit difficult because I also recognize that all energy markets are different. I mean, they carry a lot of legacy, each of us basically, but I think it's then important to set the right signals also through prices. And I think this is what's worked well for the UK, both in terms of bringing more renewable electricity to the grid through the contract for difference scheme, which provides investors with this security and makes projects bankable also from a finance perspective. And then also similarly, when we look into the phase out of coal, I think as long as investors have got clarity about what the prices of the future will be, it can be easier to adjust and make investments accordingly and enable this transition to net zero. So I think those are a couple of things. And I think if you then mix this with the innovation landscapes that we talked about and the different kind of targeted innovation funding and platforms for exchange and industry policy collaborations, I think is quite a good mix, or say at least kind of one example. I think that's been working well.
Okay, thank you very much. We are very curious to see how the UK will move on in the next years on the way to net zero. And I would like to thank you again, Mr. Otto, Mr. Tossarams, and Mr. Marienberg for your presentation, and also to our public. If you have any question afterwards, like already mentioned, you can contact our speakers via the agenda in the eWorld community. There you will find all the contact information. And I would also like to draw your attention to the next webinars of our series eWorld Wide. The next one will be on April 18th about the energy market of Bangladesh, and on May 9th about the energy market of Sweden. So I hope we will meet again then. And yes, I wish you a nice day, and bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.